The Kingsford County Courthouse buzzed with quiet conversations, the low murmur of spectators exchanging glances and whispers. The scent of old wood and aged paper filled the air, a reminder of the countless cases that had passed through these walls. Today, however, there was an unspoken certainty among the crowd. This case would be over before it even started. Standing at the defense table, Jordan Carter shifted his weight uncomfortably. His crisp white shirt was slightly oversized, the cuffs barely grazing his wrists, and his scuffed sneakers peeked out from beneath his ill-fitted dress pants. He clutched a stack of documents, his knuckles white from the pressure. Across from him, Judge Margaret Rollins adjusted her glasses and peered down at him from the bench. With decades of experience and a reputation for zero tolerance toward incompetence, she was not one to waste time. Her sharp, gray eyes flicked over Jordan before she exhaled heavily, setting down her pen with an audible click. "Mr. Carter, do you understand the importance of preparation in this courtroom?" she asked, her voice cool and unimpressed. Jordan nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor." A few chuckles rippled through the gallery, barely concealed amusement from those watching. They had seen it before. A young defendant nervously clutching a folder, thinking he could talk his way out of a charge. It never ended well. The opposing attorney, Richard Calloway, a veteran with over 20 years of courtroom experience, smirked from his seat. To him, this wasn't just a case, it was a lesson. Jordan Carter had chosen to represent himself, and Calloway was ready to make sure the young man regretted that decision. Judge Rollins leaned back, lacing her fingers together. "Well then, if you're ready, let's proceed." Jordan took a deep breath, stepping forward. His voice, though not yet steady, carried an undeniable determination. "Your Honor, I intend to prove that the citation issued against me was done so in error, based on inaccurate measurement and a misinterpretation of traffic law." And Calloway scoffed, shaking his head as if this was beneath him. "Your Honor, if I may..." Rollins lifted a hand, cutting him off. "Let the defendant speak, counselor." The laughter in the room died down. Something shifted. Jordan's eyes flicked around the room. He saw their doubt, their amusement. But what they didn't know was that he had spent years preparing for moments like this. Adjusting his papers, he lifted his chin slightly, his voice stronger than before. "I'd like to start with the conditions under which the ticket was issued and why those conditions make the charge invalid." Silence settled over the room, and just like that, the game had changed. The courtroom, once filled with barely concealed amusement, was now eerily silent. Even the court clerk, who had been absent-mindedly typing notes, had stopped to listen. Jordan Carter, the kid they had dismissed the moment he walked in, had just shifted the energy in the room. Judge Margaret Rollins adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "Go on, Mr. Carter." Jordan took another deep breath. His initial nerves had settled, replaced by a quiet confidence. He reached for his papers and carefully unfolded a diagram, hand-drawn but remarkably detailed. "This is a sketch of the intersection where I was stopped," he said, turning it so both the judge and the opposing counsel could see. "The officer's position was here, 20 feet behind the stoplight. That means his angle of view was partially obstructed by a parked truck on the side of the road." He paused, letting the information sink in. According to standard radar protocol, an officer must have a clear, unobstructed view when measuring speed. Given the officer's positioning, that wasn't possible. Richard Calloway scoffed, shaking his head. "Your Honor, this is a stretch. The ticket was issued based on an officer's professional judgment, not the scribbles of a teenager." Judge Rollins didn't immediately respond. Instead, she leaned forward, studying Jordan carefully. "Mr. Carter, are you arguing that the officer's measurement was compromised due to his vantage point?" Jordan nodded. "Exactly, and I have further evidence to support my claim." From his folder, he produced a printed excerpt from the state's traffic enforcement manual. He placed it neatly on the evidence table before stepping back. "The section of the California Traffic Code outlines the conditions under which a radar gun must be calibrated and properly used. Without direct confirmation that the radar was accurately calibrated at the time of the stop, the results can be considered unreliable." A murmur swept through the gallery. Even Judge Rollins raised an eyebrow. Calloway exhaled sharply, standing up. "Your Honor, I see what Mr. Carter is trying to do. He's throwing technicalities at the court in an attempt to muddy the waters. But the reality is simple. He was speeding. Jordan didn't flinch. Instead, he looked directly at Calloway and asked, "Can the prosecution provide documentation verifying that the radar was calibrated that day?" Calloway's smirk faltered. The room held its breath. Judge Rollins turned to the opposing counsel. "Counselor, do you have the documentation?" Calloway hesitated. "Not at this moment, Your Honor, but..." Then Mr. Carter's question stands. Silence. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Jordan saw a shift in Judge Rollins' demeanor. She wasn't looking at him as an unprepared teenager anymore. She was looking at him like a lawyer. Jordan straightened his posture. He wasn't done yet. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom had shifted. What started as a simple hearing for a traffic ticket had evolved into something much bigger. The laughter and dismissiveness were long gone, replaced by the weight of something far more serious. Judge Rollins leaned forward, her interest now undeniable. "Mr. Carter, you've presented a strong argument so far, but let's cut to the chase. Are you requesting that this case be dismissed based on procedural failure?" Jordan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." He turned back to Calloway, his posture poised but respectful. "Unless the prosecution can provide documentation proving the radar was properly calibrated, there is no legally admissible evidence against me. And without evidence, there is no case." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Spectators exchanged glances, some whispering in disbelief. This wasn't how they expected this to go. Calloway, now visibly frustrated, stood again. "Your Honor, this is a technicality. The officer issued the ticket based on his professional judgment. Are we really going to let a teenager dismantle this case over paperwork?" Judge Rollins shot him a sharp look. "Counselor, the law does not recognize technicalities. It recognizes due process. If a defendant is challenging the validity of the evidence, it is your job to prove that evidence is sound. Do you have the calibration records?" Calloway's jaw tightened. His fingers tapped anxiously on the table before he admitted, "No, Your Honor, not at this time." A stirring tension rippled through the courtroom. Judge Rollins turned back to Jordan. "Mr. Carter, do you have any other arguments before I make my ruling?" Jordan exhaled slowly. Now was the time to go all in. "Your Honor, beyond the lack of proper documentation, I'd like to raise a larger issue." Judge Rollins raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jordan took a measured step closer to the podium. "In the past 6 months, over 70% of speeding tickets issued in this district were given to drivers from a specific demographic: young, black, or Hispanic men. The data is public record." The energy in the courtroom changed again. This was no longer just about him. Now, I'm not saying every ticket was unfairly issued, but when a system disproportionately affects certain individuals, it raises an important question. Are these stops about enforcing the law, or are they about something else? Judge Rollins glanced toward Calloway, who looked even more uncomfortable now. The prosecutor hadn't anticipated this. Nobody had. Jordan continued, his voice unwavering. "The law is meant to protect everyone equally, but that only happens when it's applied fairly. And if it's not, then it's the duty of this court to correct that imbalance." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Rollins let out a slow breath before speaking. "Mr. Carter, I must say, this is not the case I expected to hear today." She turned toward Calloway. "Given the lack of sufficient evidence and the valid concerns raised by the defense, this court has no choice but to dismiss the charge." The gavel struck. The case was over. But for Jordan Carter, this was only the beginning. As soon as the gavel struck, dismissing the case, the energy in the courtroom shifted yet again. What had started as amusement, then turned into quiet respect, was now something else entirely. A realization that they had all severely underestimated the young man standing at the defense table. The gallery remained silent for a few beats before the inevitable murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Even the court officers exchanged uncertain glances. Judge Rollins tapped her gavel twice more. "That concludes today's proceedings. Court is adjourned." She stood and exited the bench with an air of contemplation, leaving the room to erupt into hushed conversations. Jordan let out a slow, steady breath. He had done it. Calloway, however, wasn't ready to accept the loss so easily. As the courtroom emptied, he approached Jordan, his expression a mixture of irritation and reluctant admiration. You're not what I expected, kid, he admitted, adjusting his tie. I don't lose to amateurs. You got lucky today. Jordan met his gaze without hesitation. Luck had nothing to do with it, sir. The law did. Calloway scoffed, shaking his head. You should have gone into law school, not come in here trying to prove a point. Jordan's lips curled into a knowing smile. Who said I haven't? Calloway's face froze. He blinked. Wait, what? Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim black wallet. With a deliberate flick of his wrist, he flipped it open, revealing a freshly printed bar card. His official certification from the State Bar Association. Jordan Carter, licensed attorney as of 3 months ago, he said smoothly. I may be 19, but I'm not an amateur. I'm just newer to the game than you are. The color drained from Calloway's face as the reality set in. He hadn't just lost to a kid. He had lost to a fully licensed lawyer. Before Calloway could find a response, a sudden burst of camera flashes illuminated the room. Jordan turned and saw a group of reporters and journalists pushing through the crowd, some already shouting his name. Jordan, how does it feel to beat a veteran prosecutor in court? Did you really pass the bar before turning 20? You plan on opening your own practice? The courtroom swirled into chaos as more people realized what had just happened. The viral moment was already spreading. Phones were recording. The buzz of excitement and disbelief was unstoppable. Jordan, however, remained calm. He straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and faced the press. I didn't come here to beat anyone, he said, his voice clear and confident. I came here for justice, just like anyone else would. Today, the law worked the way it was supposed to. That's all that matters. The cameras flashed even brighter. The world had just been introduced to Jordan Carter. And this was only the beginning. The media frenzy following Jordan's courtroom victory was nothing short of explosive. Within hours, clips of his final argument flooded social media, racking up millions of views. News anchors debated his talent. Law professors dissected his strategy. And ordinary people couldn't stop talking about the 19-year-old who outmaneuvered a veteran prosecutor. But while the world buzzed with excitement, Jordan remained grounded. Back home, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his phone, which was vibrating nonstop with calls, texts, and emails. Job offers, internship requests, even a law school professor asking if he'd be interested in guest lecturing. His mother, Evelyn, poured him a cup of tea and sat down across from him. It's a lot, huh? Jordan exhaled. You have no idea. She smiled knowingly. Actually, I do. I knew this day was coming. Maybe not like this, but I always knew. Jordan looked up at her, eyebrows raised. You knew I'd be famous for fighting a speeding ticket? Evelyn chuckled. No, I knew you'd be someone people couldn't ignore, that one day the world would see what I've always known about you. He absorbed her words, but his mind was still racing. The attention, the expectations, the next step. What was he supposed to do with all of this? Then, a knock at the door. Jordan's brows furrowed. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, standing on his doorstep was Judge Rollins. His breath caught in his throat. Your Honor? She nodded. Mr. Carter, may I come in? Jordan stepped aside, his mind still processing the fact that Judge Rollins was standing at his door. Please, come in, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Ah. The judge walked in, her sharp eyes scanning the small but cozy living room. Jordan's mother, Evelyn, stood, surprised but composed. Your Honor, she greeted respectfully. Can I get you some tea? Judge Rollins waved a hand dismissively. No need, I won't take much of your time. She turned to Jordan, her expression unreadable. You're quite the talk of the legal world right now, Mr. Carter. Jordan shrugged, still unsure why she was here. I didn't expect all this attention. I just wanted to prove my case. A small smirk touched the judge's lips. Well, you did a lot more than that. She took a step closer. You know, I don't like being wrong. But I was. About you. Jordan swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment. You walked into my courtroom and I assumed you were just another unprepared defendant wasting my time, but you weren't." Her voice softened slightly. "You were better than most attorneys I've seen in my years on the bench." Evelyn beamed with pride, but Jordan remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Judge Rollins folded her arms. "I don't know what your plans are, but I'd hate to see someone with your mind and talent go to waste." Jordan blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you belong in a courtroom, not just as a defendant, but as an attorney." Jordan's chest tightened. He had always dreamed of practicing law, but hearing those words from her made it real in a way he hadn't expected. "You have connections at Kingsford Law," she continued, referring to one of the top law schools in the state. "If you're serious, I can help you get there." For the first time in a long time, Jordan was speechless. Silence filled the room as Jordan processed Judge Rollins' offer. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing through every possibility. "Law school?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than he expected. "That's a lot." Judge Rollins nodded. "Yes, it is. But you've already proven you have the mind for it. You just need the opportunity." Jordan glanced at his mother, who was watching him closely, her hands clasped together. He could see the hope in her eyes, but she didn't push him. This had to be his choice. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "I never thought about law school seriously. I mean, I love the law, but people like me don't just walk into Kingsford Law." Judge Rollins folded her arms. "People like you?" Jordan hesitated. "People who don't have the right connections. People who didn't grow up with money or privilege. People who walk into a courtroom and get judged before they even say a word." A shadow crossed the judge's face, but she nodded. "You're right. The system is built to favor some over others. But talent, determination, those are things you already have. And they can take you further than privilege ever could, if you let them." Jordan felt a lump in his throat. The weight of his past, his struggles, and his fears pressed against him. He had spent years watching people underestimate him. But here was a judge, someone who once dismissed him, offering him the very thing he never thought possible. Judge Rollins' voice softened. "You don't have to decide right now, but if you say yes, I'll make the call first thing tomorrow." Jordan looked down at his hands, then up at his mother. Evelyn's eyes shone with emotion. "You always wanted more, Jordan," she said gently. "This is your chance." He let out a shaky breath and turned back to Judge Rollins. "Make the call." The next morning, Jordan sat on his bed, staring at his phone as if it held the weight of his entire future. The previous night had been a whirlwind of thoughts. Doubt, excitement, fear. Could he really do this? A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Evelyn peeked in. "You ready?" Jordan exhaled. "Not really, but I guess that doesn't matter now." She chuckled and walked in, sitting next to him. "It's okay to be scared, but don't let fear make decisions for you." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Judge Rollins. Jordan swallowed hard before answering. "Hello?" "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone unusually warm. "I just got off the phone with Kingsford Law. They were very interested in your story." His heart pounded. "And?" Judge Rollins chuckled. "You have an interview next week. If it goes well, a scholarship is on the table." For a moment, Jordan forgot to breathe. A full ride to law school? He barely heard the rest of what she said. Details about what to prepare, who he'd be speaking with, it all blurred together. When the call ended, he just sat there, stunned. His mother was watching him anxiously. "Well?" Jordan looked at her, still processing. Then slowly a smile broke across his face. I think I'm really going to law school." The day of the interview arrived faster than Jordan expected, dressed in a perfectly fitted navy suit, a gift from Evelyn. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. "You're going to do great," Evelyn said from the doorway, watching him with pride. Jordan turned, exhaling. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to say." She smirked. "You don't have to say anything you don't already know. Just be yourself. You got this." With a final nod, he grabbed his briefcase and headed out. The Kingsford Law School admissions office was intimidating. High ceilings, polished floors, and a long glass table where 3 professors sat, reviewing files. Jordan's file. He took a deep breath before stepping in. "Brooks," one of them greeted, adjusting his glasses. "Quite the reputation you've built for yourself." Jordan smiled nervously. "I guess so, sir." The interview began with standard questions: his background, his interest in law. But soon, one professor leaned forward. "Mr. Brooks, what you did in that courtroom, it wasn't just smart, it was bold. Some would say reckless." Jordan didn't flinch. "Respectfully, sir, I didn't see it as reckless. I saw it as necessary." The room went silent. Then, slowly, the professor nodded, a small smile forming. After 30 minutes of discussion, the head of admissions leaned forward. "Jordan," she said, using his first name, "I think we've heard enough." Jordan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "We'd like to formally offer you a full scholarship to Kingsford Law." Jordan froze. Then, as the words truly sank in, he exhaled sharply, smiling. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I won't waste this opportunity." As he stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, Jordan felt lighter than ever. This was it, the beginning of something far greater than he ever imagined. The news spread fast. By the time Jordan stepped out of the Kingsford Law School building, his phone was already buzzing nonstop. Texts from Evelyn, his old high school teachers, and even reporters who wanted to interview the kid who outsmarted the courtroom. But Jordan wasn't focused on the noise. He had spent his whole life proving himself, fighting against the assumptions people made about him. Now he had something far more important: a seat at the table. 6 months later, the courtroom was different this time. Jordan wasn't a defendant. He wasn't standing alone, being judged by people who doubted him. He was at the prosecution's table, a legal intern wearing a crisp suit and a confident stance. A case was about to begin, a small one, but his first real step into the legal world. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel in hand. "I'll rise." Jordan stood, heart steady. Because this time he belonged.